Black culture. What does that mean to you? To me, it's an affirmation of my existence, that my being in itself is influential and revolutionary, that I have purpose. As a little Black girl, my small lens of the world consisted of what was given to me by Western culture. I was absent to the thought that there is a world of intellectuals, of intuitive Black and brown mothers, and Black and brown brothers and sisters working to preserve the diaspora. To me, that is Black culture. The ego of white supremacy in America is upheld by the marginalization of people of color. Systematic racism functions to penalize Black and brown folks in order for the white masses to thrive. America has defined civilized as the authority of institutions and economic consumption, and Blackness is America's main resource for domestication. America has fabricated a whole culture and dedication to the success of systemic oppression and institutions. Disguise our purposeful exclusion as inability to coexist, labeling the culture we built from scratch as ghetto, while simultaneously feeding off of our artistic protest for capital gain. This false ideology paints a narrative of Black and brown people as unproductive members of society, as criminals, framing white America as either victims or saviors. This culture masks our lack of human rights and generational inequality without holding the founding fathers who created them accountable. My TED Talk is on the exploitation of Black culture and pop culture and its inherent intentions of immobilizing us. Since colonization and slavery, any form of Black identity was suppressed in attempts to eradicate us. Black culture is the decolonization from internalized racism. Black culture is a protest, and this is where its importance lies. Having seen something so significant to the development and livelihood of Black minds and living of one's Blackness be appropriated, discredited through pop culture is dehumanizing. Western pop culture, the same culture which has worked so hard to deprive Black people of any form of identity or independence. Spirituality is one of the only sacred things we have left to separate ourselves from the current systematic oppression we face. My Afro ancestors risked their lives just to preserve their connection to their spirits. During the colonization of indigenous people and people from Yoruba African descent, or the Tainos in the Caribbean, Santeria and other traditions were adapted to parallel Catholicism. In Santeria, there are 7 orishas, or deities. Afro-Indigenous people were forced to practice in secret in order to not only protect themselves but their future lineage. They disguised the 7 orishas as the apostles of Catholicism. The preservation of sage is also radical. Sage has always been sacred to indigenous people, always been necessary. But its survival through colonization in many ways is what preserved indigenous people. Unfortunately, the mass harvesting and commodification of sage has left it to be an endangered plant. And of course, its marketed audience is uneducated white people who think indigenous trends are universal trends. There is nothing trendy about how brown and Black people fought genocide. The cultural and ancestral traditions of Afrocentric people are rooted in our preservation. Catholicism spread to the rest of the Western Hemisphere, building its structural hierarchy on the bodies of indigenous peoples. Spirituality is meant to salvage our identities and trace back to the roots we were never supposed to know of. Therefore, it is a protest. The persecution of our identities in the 21st century looks like the exploitation of Black and Afro-Indigenous cultures in all its facets. Although these two may sound disparate, they both encompass the diaspora and are examples of the nations of people affected by the exploitiveness of capitalism. Similarly, high-end fashion and pop culture trends contribute largely to discrediting Black and brown communities. Vivienne Westwood, an expensive couture designer, released a necklace on October of 2019, claimed to be dedicated to Rastafarian culture. In actuality, the necklace depicted the Eye of Horus, an Egyptian figure. Not only was the Eye of Horus misrepresented, but it was monetized. Many African Americans have found comfort in the ideology of ancient Egypt as an attempt to trace themselves back to Africa. Reconciliation with your lineage is the hardest part when you are only aware of the continent you come from. The exploitation and cultural appropriation of Black culture goes beyond racial profiling. It's the profit off of the hundreds of years of terrorizing of Black and brown people in order to erase their identities and cultures and force submission to the white man's idea of society. Hair is also largely appropriated. When Black people were enslaved, their enslavers would shave the heads of men, women, and children as a practice of degrading them by taking away their identities. They were stripped of tradition, forced to worship a God who didn't look like them, their only sense of identity becoming the plantations they were named after. The hardships of Black hair evolved into pride in Black hair. Activists like the Black Panthers became infamous for the statements they made with their afros. White America and pop culture's fascination with Black hair. From fros being popularized by white women in the 70s, to seeing cornrows on white runway models, to white rappers and hip hop getting box braids isn't any different than taking away our identities. It is just as detrimental. It strips our love for our originality and individuality. Another popularized aspect of hip hop fashion is jewelry. In essence, displaying wealth through things like gold chains and diamonds is how Black and brown people take the trends they grew up with to another level. It's a statement that gives the middle finger to the system, saying, watch me thrive economically. Like every other part of the culture, its roots are in community. For many brown and Black girls, things like gold-plated necklaces and small silver earrings are rites of passage. So when you can afford the real thing, not only does it give you a sense and pride in yourself, but in your community. Brown and Black girls from urban environments have always made do with what we can, and yet we still invent. When you are a young Black woman being brought up by the confines of these structures, everything, from your image to the mere way you carry yourself, is always remarked, scrutinized. These structures, established by elitist white men, aren't as far away as you think. They trickle down to personal community experiences, like hoops. Hoops have brought brown and Black women together. From a way of relating to your homegirls to admiring women at a young age who had them, hoops are a staple piece of my identity. The recent SNL skit about hoops, featuring J-Lo and Cecily Strong, a white woman, only added to people's ostracization of my earrings from 24th and Mission to Harlem's 125th Street. Brown and black girls walk with dignity down concrete with ghetto girl hoops. Not only is fashion and hip hop one of the most appropriated influences, but hip hop in general. What originated from the East Coast, an African American form of expression, is now diluted in its authenticity. Now, I'm not saying there is no room for white people with bars and rap, but the idolization of hardship, from mumble rappers to white kids in the suburbs, is a problem. The admired lifestyle of the come-up is truly the glorification of oppressive structures, which forces black and brown people to have to come up anyways. When white masses admire the materialistic wealth displayed by black men and women who grew up in the midst of violence and idolize what encompasses the hustle, it not only perpetuates stereotypes, but invalidates the experiences and sacrifices made from the oppression of black poverty. It takes away from the fact that being in dangerous situations with lack of security isn't and wasn't a choice. There is privilege in being able to mindlessly enjoy stories of desensitized trauma. White America only values black people when they are purposed for their image. Just as Toni Morrison said, we value so much the idea of the struggling artist that we enfranchise not the artist, but the struggle. Often the reality of black men in the hood is unfathomable. Their lifetimes of pain cannot be equivalent to 3-minute songs. The artist Saba only scratches the surface of what he experienced growing up in Chicago in his song Gray. They killed my cousin with a pocket knife, while my uncle on the phone, he was gone for more than half my life, he got out a year and then he died. The obsession of black bodies in white America, from death in the hood to losing loved ones to gun violence, and then how white supremacy criminalizes black people for trying to survive, is ironic. Instead of questioning why black men are forced to adhere to these standards, and what is so dangerous about black masculinity if they don't, we fictionalize their realities for us to consume. Everything about what it means to be black in America means you have a target on your back. Living and breathing in my truth, living the whole diaspora, from Toni Morrison to Chief Keef, with radical large hoops makes it more difficult for me to survive. My identity is not optional. Cultural appropriation is a choice. With all the institutional access to privilege, when blackness is convenient. But it takes more than recognizing these power complexes. Educating each other as community members is the first step. For allies, all I ask is for us to be conscious of what images we're purchasing into. To remember that there was a time when the lack of freedom of expression was used to enslave black people. Ask yourself if you have the privilege to be yourself. If you can cheer for a black man in a stadium like Kobe, or bump Roddy Rich, then you can respect black culture. As Toni Morrison said, inviting compassion into the bloodstream of an institution's agenda or a scholar's purpose is more than productive, more than civilizing, more than ethical, more than humane. It's humanizing. Thank you.